Part 2. The Princess Bride. Igraine is unhappy. She wants tales of Arthur's childhood. She has heard of a sword in the stone and wants me to write of it. She tells me he was sired by a spirit on a queen, and that the skies were filled with thunder on the night of his birth. Maybe she's right, and the skies were noisy that night, but everyone I ever talked to slept through it. And as for the sword in the stone, well, there was a sword, and there was a stone, but their place in the tale is still far ahead. The sword was called Caledfouch, which means hard lightning, though Igraine prefers to call it Excalibur. And I shall call it so as well, because Arthur never cared what name his longsword carried. Nor did he care about his childhood, for certainly I never heard him speak of it. I once questioned him about his early days, and he would not answer. "What is the egg to the eagle?" he asked me, then said that he had been born, he had lived, and he had become a soldier, and that was all I needed to know. But for my most fair and generous protector, Igraine, let me set down what little I did learn. Arthur, despite Uther's denial at Clevedon, was the son of the High King, though there was small advantage to be gained from that patronage, for Uther fathered as many bastards as a tomcat makes kittens. Arthur's mother was, like my most precious queen, called Igraine. She came from Caer Gae in Gwynedd, and is said to have been the daughter of Cunetha, king of Gwynedd and high king before Uther, though Igraine was no princess, for her mother was not Cunetha's wife, but was instead married to a chieftain of Henisweiren. All that Arthur would ever say of Igraine of Gwynedd, who died when he was on the verge of manhood, is that she was the most wonderful and clever and beautiful mother any boy could ever wish for. Though, according to Kay, who knew Igraine well, her beauty was sharpened by a rancorous wit. Kay is the son of Ector ap Ednywin, the chieftain at Caer Gae, who took Igraine and her 4 bastard children into his household when Uther rejected them. That rejection occurred in the same year Arthur was born, and Igraine never forgave her son for it. She used to say that Arthur was one child too many, and somehow she believed that she would always have ruled as Uther's mistress had Arthur not been born. Arthur was the 4th of Igraine's children to survive infancy. The other 3 were all girls, and Uther evidently liked his bastards to be female, for they were less likely to make demands on his patrimony when they grew. Kai and Arthur were raised together, and Kai says, though never in Arthur's hearing, that both he and Arthur were frightened of Igraine. Arthur, he told me, was a dutiful, hard-working boy who strove to be the best at every lesson, whether in reading or sword-fighting. But nothing he could ever achieve gave his mother pleasure, though Arthur always worshipped her, defended her, and wept inconsolably when she died of a fever. Arthur was then 13, and Ector, his protector, appealed to Uther to help Igraine's 4 impoverished orphans. Uther brought them to Caer Cadern, probably because he thought the 3 daughters would be useful throw-pieces in the game of dynastic marriages. Morgan's marriage to a prince of Cernau was short-lived, thanks to fire. But Morgause married King Lot of Lothian, and Anna was wed to King Budic ap Camran across the water in Brittany. These last 2 were not important marriages, for neither king was close enough to send reinforcements to Dumnonia in time of war, but both served their small purposes. Arthur, being a boy, had no such usefulness, and so he went to Uther's court and learned to use a sword and spear. He also met Merlin, though neither man talked much of what passed between them in those months before Arthur, despairing of ever being given preferment by Uther, followed his sister Anna to Brittany. There, in the turmoil of Gaul, he grew into a great soldier, and Anna, ever conscious that a warrior brother was a valued relative, kept his exploits known to Uther. That was why Uther brought Arthur back to Britain for the campaign which ended in his son's death. The rest you know. And now I have told Igraine all I know of Arthur's childhood, and doubtless she will embellish the tale with the legends that are already being told of Arthur among the common folk. Igraine is taking away these skins one by one and having them transcribed into the proper tongue of Britain by Dafydd ap Gruffudd, the clerk of the justice, who speaks the Saxon tongue. And I do not trust him or Igraine to leave these words untouched by their own fancies. There are times when I wish that I dared to set this tale down in the British tongue, but Bishop Sansom, whom God cherishes above all the saints, still suspects what I write. At times he has tried to stop this work, or else has commanded the imps of Satan to impede me. One day I found my quills all gone, and on another there was urine in the inkhorn. But Igraine restores everything, and Sansom, unless he learns to read and masters the Saxon tongue, cannot confirm his suspicions that this work is not, in truth, a Saxon gospel. Igraine urges me to write more and faster, and pleads with me to tell the truth about Arthur, but then complains when that truth does not match the fairy tales she hears in the Care's kitchen or in her robing chamber. She wants shape-changing and questing beasts, but I cannot invent what I did not see. It is true, God forgive me, that I have changed some things, but nothing important. Thus, when Arthur saved us in the battle before Caer Cadern, I realized he was coming long before he actually appeared. For Owain and his men knew all along that Arthur and his horsemen, newly arrived from Brittany, were concealed in the woodlands north of Caer Cadern, just as they knew that Gundlius's warband was approaching. Gundlius's mistake was to fire the Tor, for the smoke pyre served as a warning beacon to all the south country, and Owain's mounted scouts had been watching Gundlius's men since midday. Owain, having helped Agricola defeat Gorfythod's invasion, had hurried south to greet Arthur, not out of friendship, but rather to be present when a rival warlord appeared in the kingdom. And it was fortunate for us that Owain had returned. Yet even so, the battle could never have happened as I described it. If Owain had not known that Arthur was nearby, he would have given the baby Mordred to his swiftest horseman and sent the child galloping to safety, even if the rest of us did go down beneath Gundlius's spears. I could have written that truth, of course, but the bard showed me how to shape a tale so that the listeners are kept waiting for the part they want to hear. And I think the tale is better for keeping the news of Arthur's arrival until the very last minute. It is a small sin, this tale-shaping, though God knows Sansom would never forgive it. It's still winter here in Dinarac, and bitter cold, but King Brockvale ordered Sansom to light our fires after brother Aron was found frozen dead in his cell. The saint refused until the king sent firewood from his care, and so we do now have fires, though not many, and never great. Still, even a small fire makes the writing easier, and of late the blessed Saint Sansom has been less meddlesome. 2 novices have joined our small flock, mere boys with unbroken voices, and Sansom has taken it upon himself to train them in the ways of our most precious Saviour. Such is the saint's care for their immortal souls, that he even insists the boys must share his sleeping cell, and he seems a happier man for their company. God be thanked for that, and for the gift of fire, and for the strength to go on with this tale of Arthur, the king that never was, the enemy of God, and our lord of battles. I shall not weary you with the details of that fight before Caer-Cadern. It was a rout, not a battle, and only a handful of Silurians escaped. Legesac, the traitor, was one who escaped, but most of Gunlius's men were captured. A score of the enemy died, including the 2 naked fighters who went down to Owain's war spear. Gunlius, Ladwis, and Tanaburs were all taken alive. I killed no one. I did not even dent my sword's edge. Nor do I remember much about the rout, for all I wanted to do was stare at Arthur. He was mounted on Chlamre, his mare, a great black beast with shaggy fetlocks and flat-iron shoes tied to her hooves with leather straps. All Arthur's men rode such big horses that had their nostrils slit into flaring holes so that they could breathe more easily. The beasts were made, even more alarming, by extraordinary shields of stiffened leather that hung to protect the animals' chests from spear thrusts. The shields were so thick and cumbersome that the horses could not lower their heads to graze at the battle's end, and Arthur ordered one of his grooms to unstrap the device so Chlamre could feed. Each of the horses needed 2 grooms apiece, one to look after the horse shield, bodycloth, and saddle, the other to lead the horse by the bridle, while still a 3rd servant carried the warrior's spear and shield. Arthur had a long, heavy spear named Rogomniad, while his shield, Winebegiruthucha, was made of willow boards covered with a skin of beaten silver that was polished until it dazzled. At his hip hung the knife called Carnwenhal, and the famous sword Excalibur in its black scabbard that was cross-hatched with golden thread. I could not see his face at first, for his head was enclosed in a helmet with broad cheek-pieces that shadowed his features. The helmet, with its gash for eyes and dark hole for a mouth, was made of polished iron, decorated with swirling patterns of silver, and had a high plume of white goose feathers. There was something deathly about that pale helmet. It had a fearsome, skull-like appearance, which suggested its wearer was one of the walking dead. His cloak, like his plume, was white. The cloak, which he was fastidious about keeping clean, hung from his shoulders to keep the sun off his long coat of scale armour. I had never seen scale armour before, though Howl had told me of it, and seeing Arthur's, I was overwhelmed with a desire to possess such a coat myself. The armour was Roman, and made from hundreds of iron plates, each no bigger than a thumbprint, sewn in overlapping rows onto a knee-length coat of leather. The plates were square at the top, where 2 holes were left for the sewing thread, and pointed at their base, and the scales overlapped in such a manner that a spearhead would always encounter at least 2 layers of iron before striking the stout leather beneath. The stiff armour chinked when Arthur moved, and it was not just iron-sounding, for his smiths had added a row of golden plates around the neck and scattered silver scales among the polished iron, so that the whole coat seemed to shimmer. It took hours of polishing each day to prevent the iron rusting, and after every battle a few plates would be missing and would need to be reforged. Few smiths could make such a coat, and very few men could afford to buy one. But Arthur had taken his from a Frankish chieftain he had killed in Armorica. Besides the helmet, cloak, and scale coat, he wore leather boots, leather gloves, and a leather belt, from which Excalibur hung in its cross-hatched scabbard that was supposed to protect its wearer against all harm. To me, dazzled by his coming, he appeared as a white, shining god come to earth. I could not take my eyes from him.